Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 272. Today I'm joined by my road dog, Chad Sylvester, and we're covering mature bucks using scrapes, e-scouting, and whether or not Epstein killed himself. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. That up front, if you listened to it, might have caught you a little off guard with the Epstein comment. I promise you, we are not going to get super political in this show. That's something that I do not do very often, if ever at all. For the sole reason that I figure if you want to dive down that wormhole, there are plenty of outlets for you to do that. We try to keep this one deer hunting and about her favorite passion and our favorite pastime. However, this show we are answering listener Q&A or listener questions, and I always will answer anything anybody sends in. And so there was a question related to that, and so Chad and I address it. But I promise you, we will not go down the rabbit hole too awful far and detract from whitetail hunting. This past week, I've had a chance to get out a little bit. Do a little bit more scouting. I'm putting the puzzle pieces together ever so slightly on this one piece on the one big deer that I was chasing last year, and got a really critical puzzle piece the past two scouting sessions. One, I found a bunch of his rubs, and I think I talked about that a little bit before in a previous session, just in relationship to unique antlers and stuff like that. But I ended up going back and making another swing through another particular area, and I came across the bed, and it's right in the area cluster of where I found his rubs, and so I feel pretty good about finding that one small little piece of the puzzle. So the past couple scouting sessions, I think I've mentioned a lot of times I'll hang cameras this time of year, especially if I'm finding what I believe to be community scrapes, so I can qualify them. Make sure deer are actually using those during the, non-prime time of the season to tell me that it is, in fact, a community scrape. And then also, I'll take and try to even mark places where I think I'm going to end up hanging. If I don't hang a cell camera on that trip, a lot of times I won't put my cell cameras in until later in the year. So I'll make a round sometime right before Velvet kind of gets ready to kick off. And that's when I'll kind of, finalize some placements, if you will. Especially on some of those primary scrapes where I want to know what caliber of buck is in the area, and then I want to kind of let it alone and not be intrusive. That's when I'll kind of swap out and put an Exodus render, cell camera on those, and then I'll utilize those in just kind of high priority places where I either one, it's a far hike in, or two, I don't want to have a lot of intrusion. But speaking of trail cameras in general, I have a super killer opportunity from our friends over at Exodus. So this is for the first time ever. They're actually offering a trade-in program for the remainder of March. The remainder of this month, they have a trade-in program that is unprecedented. So to get involved with this, you need to have an Exodus camera that you've actually registered in their database. So you bought a camera, you registered the product, you're all set up. You can take advantage of this. You can trade in any old Lift 2, or Trek and lock in $100 in savings off the Exodus Render or Render bundle. So you essentially can take any of their other cameras that they have, trade it in, get $100 toward getting an Exodus Render cell camera, which I use those, pretty extensively in a lot of kind of my key locations. If you like the idea of trading up, and who wouldn't, here's what you'll need to do. Go to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and use the code TRADEUP, that's all one word, TRADEUP, at checkout to lock in your $100 savings. After the order, the Exodus team will email you a shipping label with the order number for reference to your email. You'll print a return label, put your existing Exodus camera in a box, put the label on it, and ship it back to Exodus. And after Exodus gets the camera, they'll ship your order out to you. If that was a little much to follow, you can go to the link I'll put a link in the podcast show notes, and you can follow the instructions there that they have on their website. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's podcast. I have my road dog, Chad Sylvester, on with me today, answering listener Q&A questions, or I guess it wouldn't be Q&A questions, it'd just be listener Q&A or listener questions. Always love doing these podcasts, or these episodes specifically. You guys write in some really cool stuff and make me, and our guest think about, different things we may not have thought about, in some time, or think about things differently than we've ever thought about them before. And so these are always some of my favorite shows to do throughout the course of the year. It gives me a chance to catch up with a good buddy of mine, and then just really address the things that you guys are, the things you have on your mind that are kind of are burning you up, or the things that you're most interested in hearing about. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's show. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And I just had a podcast with Greg Litzinger and referred to him as almost like the pseudo co-host. I have like a handful of guys that are like pseudo co-host, and I think that my buddy Chad here on the other line ranks as a pseudo co-host on this podcast at this point. What do you think, man?
Yeah, I would agree, dude. I think you probably have a cylinder of revolving co-hosts or possible co-hosts, but that's good company, man.
No, it is,
between
man.
Me and Greg, that's good company.
That's what I'm saying, dude. It's like I can't get much better. Now, I will tell you this, because this is the first time you and I are actually talking since I did the record with Greg, because as we're recording this, it hasn't come out yet. But your name was mentioned probably no less than 20 times in that hour and 40. Well, because it became like the running joke within the podcast itself, where like we would be talking about deer, big deer or something, and Greg would just throw out Chad. Like whenever someone would mention big deer because you killed that big deer in Kansas, and I'd, and just every so often, whenever there was a break in the silence, he would just mention your name, like Chad, like, anything that was good that was happening. It's like, yeah, so-and-so did whatever, or saw a big deer, and he'd just go Chad. So just so you know, I was like, I mentioned to him, I was like, I'm gonna have to make sure Chad listens to this one. I was like, because he was kind of like, he was present, he was omnipresent in that episode without actually being on the line. So showing you some love.
I'm glad my name was mentioned in kind of that application or that use case versus what it could have been, I guess. So
yeah, it wasn't mentioned in like unison or in connection with Road Dog, DAWG, or anything.
Okay.
Or anything like
it.
that. Yeah, so it was all in good graces. But for anyone out there who doesn't know who Chad is, this is my buddy. I'm sure you've heard of him. If you don't know it yet by now, he's been on the podcast a ton. Owner of Exodus trail cameras, my hunting buddy that I go out to Kansas with and hunt with all the time, and travel hunt with. And I don't know, man, I always just like doing these listener Q&As, and I typically like doing them with, someone that I'm good kind of buddies with, because it just makes for a more interesting conversation. Because quite honestly, these questions that people send in, and you've done one of these with me before, it's almost like just chopping up with your buddy, because this is the exact type of stuff we talk about when we're in a trailer or out hunting and stuff like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like we're running scenarios past one another. What do you think about this? Or if you're in this situation, like what would you do? And like, yeah, it's just super, super natural to kind of cut these up and discuss them
Yeah.
with your dude. So
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, the listener Q&A stuff, it makes you stop and think about things maybe you haven't thought about before. And that's always kind of the fun part of it. It makes you maybe dissect things a little bit differently than you would in the heat of the moment when you're maybe trying to make some decisions about your hunt specifically. This gives you a chance to maybe be a little bit more reflective, um, and maybe have a little bit better, maybe we'll say a deeper or add more depth to the answer, if you will. So with that, today, that's what our plan is. We're going to go through a bunch of listener Q&A questions. This is going to run the gamut from some of them are funny, which I always like, to serious deer hunting questions. Got some trail camera questions, got some just, doe hunting questions. It's kind of all over the place. And so if you're down with it, man, we're just going to kind of go ahead and jump right into it and get the ball rolling. You game?
yeah, let's kick it off, man.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to start with this one. I've got these screenshots here in front of me, so I'm just going to kind of go with whatever pops up first. So this fella writes in here, and I'm going to try to mention some folks' names, give some of you guys a shout out. So Instagram, Justin ENCK Inc. Justin Inc. I hope I'm saying your name right, or maybe that's not even your name. But he just said, hey, give us a score estimate of the big deer you're seeing and that you're kind of chasing on the new PA spot. So I guess that well, you've seen the pictures as well. And I actually, after Greg and I got done recording, we actually went through just a bunch of trail camera photos and stuff like that, because he and I hadn't been together face to face since probably, man, I don't know, probably August or something like that, or June or September, maybe something like that. I think this was the last time we were actually hanging out. So we were just kind of flipping through a bunch of trail camera photos and videos I had. And I don't know, looking at him, and Greg, I think, agreed with me. I feel like he's in the 60s. I don't know exactly what, but I feel like he breaks the 60s. Now, he's only a 9-point. And I feel like next year, if he puts on a 10th point, I have no doubt at that point that he would be Boone and Crockett next year, is kind of my feeling about it. And I know he's alive. I know he made it. So I know, he'll be around next year. But I don't know, my kind of guesstimate based off the video footage I have is probably, in the 60s somewhere, whether it's 62, 63, 65. I don't know 100%, but like he's got these sweeping kind of main beams, almost kind of, and Greg pointed this out, where when they swoop in and almost touch, like you're getting almost like an extra, like 4 to 5 inches of main beam on each side that doesn't look like it because it's not sticking out forward.
It's very deceiving when they have those beams.
Right. So that's where my guess is. My guess is like somewhere 60 to 63 would be kind of, if I had to put more specific numbers on it. What do you think? You've seen the video. I think that you sent me pictures and videos of that deer. I mean, basically since the first time you had him on camera. So I mean, I'm pretty familiar with that particular animal. I would agree with you. I would say somewhere between that 158 to 162 range would be my guess. Like if I had to like put a physical number on it. Right.
And I say that to your point about the main beams, like anytime deer have those swooping beams that kind of turn in and kind of curve up like that, it is very, very deceiving. Like when you have to measure those by eyeball on that radius, like it's just super, super hard to do.
Yeah.
So I would say somewhere between 58 and 62. Yeah. Now, traditionally, like not traditionally, but apparently, like there's this theme going around the office where like somebody will ask me a score of a deer, like based on trail camera pictures, and this is not an exact science. Like it is the best guesstimate you can possibly put on it. But after you look at hundreds or thousands of deer, like you can get kind of ballpark. You can get pretty close. Mm-hmm. But apparently everybody in the office thinks that I'm crazy when I look at certain deer and I'll say, oh, that's a 135-inch 8-pointer or whatever. And they're like, no, that deer's way, way bigger than that, yada, yada, yada. So apparently, I guess historically, I am typically a few inches conservative on my numbers, almost always.
I will 100% agree with that. And I will give 2 examples of you and giving like guesstimate numbers. you gauging yardage for one is
yeah,
like,
I'm not good at that.
Yeah, my man, it would be like 10 yards, and he'll be like, he was at 50 yards. I couldn't, and so I'm like, and I'll pull out a range and I'm like, dude, that was 10 yards. Like, he was on top of you, And the other one is when you shot that big deer in Kansas, like you texted me after, and you were like, I shot a big deer. And just for context for people that are listening, and I'm sure they heard the episode we did while we were in the trailer, but we were out chasing just kind of anything that was like, Pope and Young and bigger, like spotting and stalking like 125, 130, 135 inch deer was like what we were after. And so when he texted me, he shot a big deer, I was like, oh, that's awesome, And like the next text, I wish I could get it verbatim, but I don't remember exactly, but it was something to the effect of like, he's anywhere between like 125 and 170. And I'm like, my man, that's a pretty large scale we're talking about. Like we're talking about like that's a lot of fun to like, that's a once in a lifetime kind of experience type of deal. And just for those that are listening, it was over 170. So
yeah.
But
that whole ordeal happened so fast. It was in the heat of the moment. Like the deer could have been 130 inches or 170 inches. Like I had just, and his frame's high, tight, short beam. So, it is what it is, but I was just jacked. So
yeah, no, but I think your guesstimate on this particular deer is pretty accurate. Cause that's kind of where I've been since the day I saw him. And the reason why, 158 probably maybe feels a little bit more right. Like as a 9-point, kind of hesitant to say that he's cracking 160, but it was just like those swooping main beams, like just the extra inches you're going to get out of that. I'm like, man, that just feels like he might be a little bit bigger than that. But I think you're right. I think he is like the 158, 162 ish range. Either way, he's going to be an awesome animal next year, regardless. Yeah. And
I mean, as a 9-pointer, that is absolutely ginormous.
Oh yeah,
ginormous as a 9-pointer.
Yeah, for sure. And he's all that. Like he's fully mature, big deer. Like he's mountain buck. Like he's everything you would look for. So hopefully that answered your question, Justin. And I'll keep you posted. Hopefully at some point with some grip and grins of that guy. That'd be awesome. This next question is from Drew's View. He asks that he's asking specifically in the PA woods, but we'll just kind of open it up in general. But single pin versus multi pin in the timber, and you go ahead and take this one because we might have different answers based on whether we're in the timber or whether we're out in the plains. So you go ahead and take that one first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a single pin guy, man. Typically when I'm in the timber and I get set up, I am like, as you said, in the warm up or the intro of the episode of the conversation, like I am terrible at judging yardage. Like I'm just not good at it, especially when I get elevated in hill country where you're, steep downward angles or uphill. I'm just not good at it. So the very first thing I do is try to range trees and like play shot scenarios through my mind, which I think is good practice for everybody.
Yeah.
And then also my shot sequence, like I don't like to have a bunch of things in my vision or things to be thinking or just basically more things in my field of view to be thinking about. Like there's one thing there with a single pin, the animal, and like that kind of clears my sight picture up a little bit and just leaves my mind at ease. So I'm a very big single pin guy. I've been single pin for, I don't even know, 6, 7, 8 years. And the only thing I think you have to be careful of with single pin is your arrow setups. If you're like the high FOC guy, 700 grain arrow, like there's a big difference between your 20-yard, your tape at 20 yards and your tape at 35 yards. Yeah. I mean, so you have to be careful with your arrow setup there. I think that has something to do with, shooting a multi-pin or shooting a single pin. Mm-hmm. But in the timber, I mean, I've killed a bunch of deer with my bow. I've never shot a deer over 30 couple yards. Now I've shot at deer over 32 yards and have missed them.
Right.
I think that one specific example is probably Missouri. I shot that deer at 40 yards and he was a little further than that, shot underneath of him. But all the way around, I'm an advocate for single pin sights.
Yeah. No, I would kind of echo everything that you said. I moved the single pin, I don't know, whatever it was, probably 4 years ago. Maybe it was 5, definitely 4 years ago. and I was just struggling with my shot in general, and it was kind of amazing. Like there were two things that I changed that made a big difference in my shooting. One was changing to a single pin sight because cleaning up my field of view made a huge difference in just like in just my comfort level of trusting what I was seeing and not worrying about do I have the right pin or the wrong pin, because I don't know how many times even just shooting in the backyard or whatever that you would accidentally grab the wrong pin, just in not paying attention or whatever. The other thing was shooting. Once I started shooting a single pin, it allowed me to shoot with both my eyes open as opposed to closing one eye. And that, for whatever reason, being able to see out of my periphery, like removed all my like anxiousness and anticipation of the shot. Just not having like a side of my face that was like blacked out or blacked off. You know what I mean? Shooting with both my eyes open was a complete, I'm not gonna say game changer, but it enhanced my ability to shoot like no one's business and increased my confidence, and my comfort level went through the roof just by those two things. So for me, I'll probably never go back and shoot a multi-pin ever again, just for that reason. I can see, to your point, I do think the one challenge is when you are shooting heavier arrows and stuff like that, just like your gapping has to become a little bit more, you have to be more disciplined, I think, in shooting, especially if you're going to gap shoot beyond your pin. Because I'm a guy who doesn't move his pin. Like when I go out to hunt, I don't range something and move my pin to 30. It's like I usually set my pin at 26 yards. This is really kind of something I learned from Brian Broderick from Day 6 Gear. Was find at what yardage that when you hold on the bullseye, center of a bullseye, find the yardage at which your pin where your arrow drops hits 3 inches below the mark that you're holding, right? Like that's kind of like your effective range. And for me, it's like at 26 yards. So at 30 yards, whatever the yardage it is that I need to be at, I want my arrow to land 3 inches below the bullseye at 30 yards, whatever that is. And for me, that's 26. That's like 26 yards, 25, 26 yards, because a deer's kill zone is about 6 inches, right? And so if I'm shooting out of an elevated platform, I still have to play angle, right? Like I'm still gonna hit the deer high, most likely, and exit low, right? Just based on the angle of like how you're set up. So if you hold center mass at 30 yards in Pennsylvania or in a pressure state, that deer is going to probably maybe not jump the string, but probably going to slink just a little bit. So you've got a little bit of play there. You got 3 inches up and down to play with at 30 yards essentially, right? And so no matter what shot you're taking, basically from 30 yards or in, you can just hold center mass, in the center of the lungs and let it rip, and you're going to have a kill shot. And so I use that approach because I don't ever have to worry about, do I hold high? Do I hold low? I just hold center mass for every shot between 0 and 30 yards, and I know that I'm going to have an effective kill shot. And that's my approach to it. And that's something I picked up from Brian. I probably butchered the explanation of it, but that's the gist of it, is that, you're going to have to deal with some angle. So if you're at 5 yards and you hold center mass, if you hit a little bit high anyway, that's all right, because your angle of exit is going to be a lot steeper. So you actually want to hit just a little bit high. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot of that guesswork out of that scenario as well as like just your distance in general. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, I totally agree, man. You're not you're not shooting X's on paper. You're shooting a basketball,
right?
I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. So there's room there for some air.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all the points that you made.
Yeah. And the thing that it does for me is it just takes all the thinking work out of it whenever it's time to try to make a shot. Yeah, there's enough going on of like, when do I draw, when do I move to get in a position? Like, it's just one less thing that you have to think about. You just grip it, let it and rip it essentially once it's in the range.
Yep.
So anything to add there, or are you good?
No, I think we covered that one.
Okay, cool. This next one. All right, this is kind of fun. This is from Brian Graga. I don't know if I said your name right or not, Brian. It says, "What is your funniest encounter in the woods?" I don't know if I have. Yeah, I don't know if I have a funny encounter in the woods or not. I'm trying to think. I can't speak from personal experience, but I saw some trail camera pictures that Taylor Chamberlain sent one time of a guy basically in a nightie, like walking through the timber, and was surprised to see someone's trail camera was there. And
I'm not even. Dude was like in a legit nightgown.
Oh, dude, he was not a nightgown, dude. He was in like pink lingerie, like silk, like nighty. Yeah, like dude was getting on some freak stuff. You know what I mean? I don't know what he got. I don't know what he has going on there in DC. That hasn't happened to me, but that's the funniest thing I've ever seen in the woods was that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't have anything that comes close to that. I mean, I've been spooked or scared a few times in the woods, like just caught off guard by snakes or possums at night or something like that, but nothing no dude rubbing like lotion on his skin walking through the woods in freaking lingerie.
Right. Well, I mean, DC, dude, it's got all kinds of folks hanging out there, lingerie guys. So I think we'll go ahead and pass on. I don't think either of us can beat Taylor's trail camera picture.
No.
So I think we'll pass on that. But anyone out there listening, you should message Taylor and ask him to see that trail camera photo. All right, so we'll move on to this next one. So this is cleared hot bow hunting. He says he's asking, what is the number one thing to look for when e-scouting? You want to take a swing at this one first?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at it. I think the number one thing for me is edge. Which is nothing new. I mean, I think if you ask 100 deer hunters that question, probably 50 plus of them are gonna answer that, because I say edge over food sources or topography, because edge is consistent whether you're hunting ag ground, whether you're hunting swamps, whether you're hunting big woods, hill country. There's always edge. Deer are creatures of edge. They're always going to use edge or be attracted to change of habitat and that edge feature, whatever it may be. But when you think about edge, it's not always. I think when people think of edge, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is vegetation. Mm-hmm. So that like an edge of hardwoods meeting maybe CRP, or hardwoods meeting a stand of conifers, or hardwoods meeting the edge of a clear cut. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the obvious examples, but it could also be waterway features meeting obviously dry land. It could be marsh type stuff meeting dry land. It could be those terrain or topography features meeting lower levels or flat ground. So I think all the way around, to me, like the first thing I'm looking for is edge. If I had to boil it down to it, only choose one thing, it would be edge.
Right. Yeah, the other edge too, and I agree with you, and I have a couple points that I'll make, but the one edge too that I started having to look for in this one spot, kind of the new spot that I'm at, is that there are hard edges made by abrupt topography changes. To where it's like if you're in hill country, it's like you kind of get that like, oh, here's a ridge. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's a gradual kind of, we're going to go up the ridge. This place here, there are places where it's so abrupt, like you're not scaling it. Deer are going to have to work around it, essentially, right? And so I've actually found that was one of the kind of things that I kind of learned when I was there hunting and scouting in the late season, was I ended up following one of those kind of abrupt topography changes where it's almost not scalable, where I was like, all right, this is an edge. Let's see if I can find some deer sign. And sure enough, I was walking along it and it was like, here's some scat, here's some scat, here's some scat. And that was ultimately how I landed in that that spot that I found all that sign that I sent you some of those pictures of. That was ultimately what led me there. And there, I was pretty sure that they were probably using that edge to get there. And so that's kind of one thing where it's like, I don't think it's as common, right? Because a lot of folks are probably hunting in hill country or where they've got, rolling hills and stuff like that. So the topography may not kind of change that drastically, but in areas that it does, it's the same concept where you use them as like a back wall or something to kind of keep movement from getting behind you or downwind from you or whatever, like some type of barrier. That barrier still, exists as an edge as well. The number one thing, and I'll kind of pivot because I agree with you, it's edge, but it kind of depends on where I'm at. But one of the things I look for a lot is water, because you're going to get a lot of the stuff that Chad already mentioned, in and around that area. And what I always kind of tell people, if they're a newer hunter, and you're at a new place, a new piece, and you're trying to scout it, and you really don't know where to start, and and that happens to people who are experienced to people who aren't experienced. is I just start looking for water, because usually water is going to create the edge that Chad mentioned. It's also going to create a diversity of habitat, which you kind of want to have, because it's going to give you layers of things. It's also going to give you soft edges. It's going to give you cover. It's going to give you probably some element of food. There's probably, if there's water in a specific direction, it's probably, predators can't come from that direction. So you kind of have a deer would have a barrier. So they really have to, be diligent about protecting themselves via sight or sound or smell from one direction, as opposed to all directions, or whatever the case is. And there's some other benefits there where, the ground's a little softer, so sign holds a little longer. The downside is you don't know how old that sign may or not be. But if you don't know where to start, you can always kind of go there, and you'll be able to find beaten down trails. There's probably going to be rubs there. Things are probably going to be browsed there. You can probably find a track because of how soft the ground is, right? You can probably cut a track and be able to tell if it's a mature deer, does, fawns, whatever it is that's in the area. So that's one of the reasons why, if I'm going to a new area, if there is significant water in a spot, I'll usually try to go to that if I can't figure anything else out first. That'll kind of be my backup plan. Would be like, well, if all else fails, I'll head to water and then kind of work backwards from there.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's with my answer revolving around edge, it's the same concept. Like from an e-scouting perspective, you're marking edge as a starting point. Mm-hmm. More than likely, there's going to be sign laid down there. There's going to be rubs or maybe scrapes, tracks, all the things that you mentioned. And then you're able to work backwards in any direction, whether you're going to food or to bedding or vice versa, whatever you're doing. But it's that edge is, again, a lot of times where the sign's being laid down late October through the rut or whatever time period. And, it's just a solid starting point exactly. to work off of.
Yeah. Cool. I think we covered that one pretty well. What do you think? Is there anything else we need to add, or are we good?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. This next one is Josh Levere, I think is his name. I'm going to get so much hate mail for pronouncing everybody's name wrong on this.
I'm so glad you're the host and doing this. That's one thing I refuse to do.
Yeah.
It's you and Jake.
Yeah, I usually never do the names for that reason, because I'm god awful at pronouncing them. Because I'm just a hillbilly from Central PA, where we say all the words wrong. So, but I figured I would give it a whirl this time and try to show some folks some love. Hopefully they'll understand. I'm trying to show you some love. If I said your name wrong, I don't know, email Exodus about it. How's that? All right. So Josh writes in and says, what portion of the season do you find mature bucks most consistently hitting scrapes? You want me to take this one first, since you've had to go first the past two times?
Sure.
All right. I think the conventional wisdom is, that last week of October is a fantastic week to play anything off of scrapes, and I won't dispute that. I think there are other specific times that you might have a better chance of finding a more mature deer, and that's kind of that classic, later October, when a lot of the does have been bred and the big boys have to kind of really start to move, have to start checking some scrapes, and the scrapes kind of heat up for the second time. Because I think a lot of times, and Chad, you and I kind of experienced this, whether we were hunting together in Ohio, whether it's in Kansas or whatever, the time frame that we go in often is, the first 2 weeks, or the second and third week, where the first 2 weeks, that first week, scrapes can still kind of be in play, but it's going to be really kind of touch and go, right? And so you kind of have to qualify whether the scrape is active or not active. That last week of October is a time frame where it's if it's a good scrape, chances are it's pretty active, right? I'll caveat that by saying not all scrapes are created equal. I really don't spend any of my time in and around scrapes if I don't know with a pretty solid certainty that it's some form of community scrapes, right? So that, to me, it's if you have that last week of October is probably your best time just from a volume play. If you're trying to find the more mature deer that are in the area, I think one of the times would be that late October time frame, because you're going to get a big guy that's probably willing to make a mistake in daylight and risk it to try to find one of those last does. However, my personal favorite time is actually that 13th through the 18th. I've just watched too much trail camera data for me personally over the past couple years that I've had some really good setups, that I've had most of my mature buck inventory and encounters while I was hunting in that October lull time period in and around primary scrapes. And I'm just now becoming a more and more firm believer that that's actually the best time to find a mature buck that will, I won't say consistently hitting it, but will give you the best opportunity in a pressured state to get the job done before the pressure really kind of gets on. And that to me is kind of the key to it. Because when you start talking about consistently hitting scrapes, if you're in a pressured area and you're going to try to play that last week of October timeframe, just say in Pennsylvania, the places I hunt, good luck, man. It's going to be a lot of nighttime activity. And you better have like a primo spot that's in like the gnarliest cover community scrape that no one else wants to go to because it's so hard to get to. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing ghosts most of the time, And so that's why for me in a high pressure state, I really look at that early October timeframe. And Greg and I actually just talked about this too, and actually mornings, because that's the time where I'm getting the coolest temperatures is in the morning. It's also the time when people are out hunting after work. And so for me, it's that time frame, mid-October, early morning, and I think that would be it. I think that would be kind of my recommendation. Consistently, maybe that last week of October, but it's probably going to be a lot of nocturnal stuff. If you want to find them in daylight, I would say middle October and very late November.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into a question or answering a question like that. Pressure related, habitat related, deer density related, buck to doe ratio related. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. But kind of just crossing some things off my list and answering this, take perimeter scrapes, stuff on field edges, things away from cover, things away from bedding, like take that completely out of the scenario. I think those scrapes are great to run cameras on. They're not very intrusive. It's a good way to gather inventory. They're, again, going back to the intrusive thing, they're easy to go in and check and have some decent data on. But to your point, like that's probably not where you're going to get a whole lot of daytime activity, and probably not an area of focus that you're going to end up hunting because it's so far removed from daylight activity, coming from bedding. So take that out of the equation and focus on, primary and community scrapes in and around security cover, in and around bedding. I would agree with you. Like the last, that signing phase, the last later part of October is where you're going to see the most sign being laid down, where scrapes are the most active. And then as bucks start to shift their attention more to breeding, those scrapes typically dry up. And, that is a time when you see those scrapes start to dry up. That's when like your attention should probably be on the doe bedding, playing those downwind sides. That's something that we see quite a bit. But I guess going back to specifically answering the question, we have, I don't even know. I'm not going to say millions of trail camera pictures and millions of data points on this, but we have a lot. And honestly, it probably is over 1 million. One thing that I feel very strongly about is that peak breeding date. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to call that in the southern portion of Ohio and through a lot of the Midwest as November 9th, as peak breeding. And I think that you can go backwards about 12 to 15 days from peak breeding, and that is where you're going to see the most activity being laid down on primary scrapes. So calling that November 9th, I think that would put you somewhere between like the 22nd to the 28th of October, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. So that's what our trail cameras have told us, whether you're in hill country, whether you're in ag ground, swamp, whatever. That's across multiple states, kind of every gamut that you can possibly think of. Now, on a specific deer, trying to have an opportunity to go in and kill him on a primary scrape, I think that there's a lot more that goes into that. I think that there's probably previous year's history. And then I actually would tend to agree with you somewhere between like the 14th to 18th, somewhere in that time frame. If you have a cold front or a precipitation event, I think if the annual data is telling you that he was there the year prior, I think that's when you probably have better odds. Mm-hmm. But overall, from a volume perspective, I would still stick with, that 12 to 15 day time period before peak breeding in your area. So if you think peak breeding let's say you're in the South, like South Tennessee, South, Virginia or whatever. If you think your peak breeding is shifted back a little bit, I mean, you just use that 12 to 15 day rule and then just count backwards. And I think that'll give you a pretty decent, idea of when that stuff's going to happen if you don't already have the annual data as a starting point.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said. And that's basically been what I've done as far as some of those key spots I have is it has been following specific deer. Now, this year it was a different deer in the same spot that landed the same day. But what that tells me is more probably about the doe group than it does about those specific bucks necessarily.
Right.
Which is also in play, right? Because I mean, a lot of these primary scrapes are laid down outside of, adjacent to doe bedding a lot of times.
Yep.
And so there's a couple. To your earlier point, the way you kind of started off was that there's so many factors to it that you have to kind of take into consideration to kind of figure out whether or not it's, a particular scrape is huntable or not. Backdating, like you said, like makes all the sense in the world, and you have all the data to back it up. I just know from personal experience for me here, because that's the time when guys are going to start taking off, and I live in an area that has a ton of pressure. That's almost like a no-fly zone for me. You know what I mean? It's like I almost have to try to do that earlier and play that earlier time frame because the amount of pressure that's going to hit, I'm just not going to see deer in those areas most likely during daylight.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, but yeah, I think we covered that one pretty well. I feel like you feel good about that one?
Yeah, I feel pretty good.
All right, cool. All right, this is Howie H2 Miller. You can take this one first. This one is favorite terrain feature and food source to key in on.
Okay. Well, for me, to wrap some context around how I'm going to answer this, my answer is coming from experience in big woods hill country. So not a whole lot of structure, not much ag, not much at all. So favorite terrain feature for me are benches. In the topography that I'm hunting, it's pretty steep. It's not really rolling topography changes. It's like spine back ridges that are very pointed on top. They're not really all that flat. I would say anywhere from 3 to 5 yards wide on the top.
Yeah.
Top to bottom, you have roughly 500 feet in elevation change. So when you can identify a bench either on that lower 1/3 or the upper 1/3, and where it ties into another terrain feature like the top of a drainage, like to me those spots are dynamite. So by far, both from like in-person sightings and encounters, and then also just running trail cameras. Benches are it for me. And then I guess going to food sources, I think that in the early season, I'm gonna kind of have a cop-out answer here, but it's white oaks. Swamp whites. I mean, there's all kinds of different white oaks, but basically any oak that has a rounded lobe on its leaf and doesn't have a point, that's going to be a white oak. And I'm going to be looking for that in the early season. As you go into the later part of the season, you can kind of switch that and say red oaks. But for me, that has a lot of drawing power because there's not a lot of structure, there's not a lot of ag in these areas, so you have natural browse, clear cuts, hardwood regeneration, greenbrier, honeysuckle, and oaks. So it's kind of oaks all the way around.
Right. Yeah. It's so my answer, if you guys can't tell already, Chad and I hunt together a lot. And so I look for we hunt a lot of the same areas together. So I look for a lot of the same stuff as far as terrain feature. Aside from hunting that specific spot together and kind of having to rely on, benches and in multiple kind of things that kind of coalesce in one area as being ideal. It's something that I've kind of had to learn in this new piece that I've been scouting as well. But it was a little bit different because it's not as much up and down as it is in the spot that you and I've hunted together in the past. It's a lot more side hilling and I'll say maybe even just like slightly steeper terrain. But the thing that I found that's interesting is a lot of times it's not the benches that are in that classic kind of top third where you would think that that's where they would be spending time or traveling. It's actually in the middle third is where I was finding a lot of most of the deer sign and where the deer wanted to be and where I was getting trail camera pictures. And then even whenever I hung a trail camera in a particular area and moved it, daytime pictures I was getting. And when I say a bench, in some of these places, there really isn't a bench. The bench was created by an old logging road that's now grown over or whatever, and that essentially kind of exists as a bench in this particular spot. And I put a trail camera on it, and sure enough, that was where I got a ton of daylight buck pictures, mature buck pictures. And it's just the easiest path for them to kind of maneuver through. And so a lot of what Chad said, holds true in that spot as well. That area, again, is a little bit different. So one of the other things that I kind of I'm having to get used to there is, and I have a little bit of it around me locally, but I don't spend a whole lot of time in it, is mountaintop swamps. Like I scout them some around here, but I've just not found great setups in them around here. But in this particular area, the new place that I'm scouting and spending some time in, they are probably the primary draw for bedding, what I learned from talking with some of the local foresters and stuff around there. So I think one of my new favorite terrain features is going to have to be that, because there's just a lot of flat top where you get a lot of just a lot of kind of, whether it's frag and just kind of swampy swampy features on the top of these mountains. As far as food, same as Chad. I mean, early part of the year, white oak acorns are king. If you've got those and you know where there's at and they're isolated, you are in the chips. If it's not super close to where deer want to be, or a buck you're trying to kill is spending time, and it maybe is a little bit out of his comfort zone, so to speak, to get there. This is just things I've picked up from Johnny Stewart. Whenever I go in October and I'm scouting, and if there aren't any acorns in that particular area, it's like I just start looking to see what they're what's being nipped on. I'm looking to see, like, has greenbrier been chewed off? It has this leaf that I have no clue what it is. Has it been eaten? It's like I just try to observe and see, like, what are they chewing on and what has been nipped off, and that will kind of start to tell me what they're actually choosing to eat during that time of year if I don't have white oak acorns around. And then of course red oak as things transition. And that, going back to the previous question that we answered around scrapes, this year I had a dynamite scrape spot that I should have killed a deer and just didn't time it right. But there were white oak acorns that were dropping in and around this community scrape. And that is why that mature deer that I was trying to kill was living in that spot from like the 13th or 15th of September through like the 13th of October. And he was there consistently in daylight. And it's because it had, and going back to what you said, multiple things coming together, right? It was the primary scrape. It was near a cut. There was a drainage that was there that was giving him a really good kind of thermal advantage in that particular area, and a big primary scrape. And so, his bedding, it wasn't far from there. Was what my assumption was. So, a bunch of things coming together in one spot meant that deer was really, really comfortable and willing to stick his neck out pretty frequently. So,
yep.
Cool. Anything else to add to that one, or are we good there?
I just want to talk about saddles for a second, because I think that when guys are e-scouting, looking at maps, looking at, onX, HuntStand, whatever app that they're using, I think the general populace, everybody is marking that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we, I didn't grow up hunting hill country. Like, I had to kind of teach myself. I grew up hunting flat ag ground on a really easy farm. And so when I was transitioning into like big wood hill country stuff, like the saddle stuff, it's easily recognizable on a map, and everybody is dropping pins there.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found through running trail cameras in all these saddles is the stuff that is very easily recognizable from a map. You can bet your paycheck on that everybody that's looking and hunting that area has that same exact terrain feature marked. And then with running cameras year over year, you see more human intrusion, you see more human pressure. And with that pressure, you typically see less daytime activity. Now, you have the flyers, right? Like during the rut, park yourself in a saddle and you sit there for 5, 6, 7 days and wait for, or hope that something comes cruising by. And like I played that game, it just has never worked out. I think you have to have a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of mental toughness and discipline for that strategy to work. So I would challenge people to get outside of the normal shoebox features that you can see from a map, because a lot of even the benches that we found to be fruitful aren't necessarily benches that are super identifiable on the map, like reading topo lines, because depending on how you have your lines set up, that bench may only be 5, 6, 7, 8 feet wide. Mm-hmm. And if your lines are on 10-foot lines or 20-foot lines, like you're not going to see that on a map.
Yeah.
So just keep that stuff in mind, I guess, when folks are e-scouting.
No, that's a great point. And then it made me think of another thing, which is, when you're asking about favorite terrain feature, it could be a favorite terrain feature to hunt. That's one way to look at it. It could also be a favorite terrain feature to scout, which means it might not be the place that you hunt, but it might be the place where you start to find things that you're looking for to lead you to the place that you're going to hunt. Right. And so one of the things that, some of the spots that I hunt, don't have, it's weird. I go from extremes. I go from places that have insane kind of topography changes to places that have none, to places that have none in certain spots and a ton in others, like all at the same place. And so one thing I've had to rely on a little bit is finding specific kind of elevation lines that they want to travel for whatever reason. It could be that this elevation line connects two cuts that I can't really see and I'm not putting together in my mind, but when I walk it, I recognize it, or small little draws that maybe wouldn't look like a draw because it's not like a big deep cut or anything like that on the map, but it's just like a small sway in the topography. That was one of the things that like I picked up on in talking to Greg when I was trying to figure out what this big deer was doing and where he was maybe bedded. And he and I were looking at the maps together, and he picked up on like a small little draw that I would never even refer to as a draw. He was like, "What about that draw?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "That draw." He's like, "That small little sway there." He's like, "You see the tit off to the right?" He's like, "And the other one off to the left." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "That draw in between." And it's so subtle, but sure enough, like I went to investigate this last time that I was out scouting, just, at this point, like 2 weeks ago or whatever. And sure enough, there was sign there, and it's just like those small little things that you overlook because it doesn't seem significant. It's like some of those things are the things that you need to kind of pick up on. It's like figuring out and in that topography line, if you figure out like an elevation line that they want to use, it may hold true. I've been places where it's held true all the way around a ridge, where it's like they're using that to kind of as a rut travel corridor all the way around the ridge. And as long as that the elevation line doesn't get broken, they're going to use that to wrap all the way around, so it's things like that. So it might not be the thing that you want to hunt, but it might be the thing that you need to use in order to find the stuff to get you to the place that you want to hunt ultimately, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So cool. I think we answered that one pretty well. This next one, this guy, this is from Jake Hofer.
Ooh.
He's like, yes. What's a road dog DOG versus a road DAWG?
Oh man, how did I know that was going to come up?
Yeah, I think we're going to let that one go because this is a family show. But there is a difference between road dog DOG and road DAWG. Chad and I kind of refer to each other as our road dogs. This is like the inside baseball story. And anytime Chad texts, like, I'll text him like, "Hey man, what's going on?" He'll be like, "Nothing. What's up, dawg?" DAWG. And that's just like in our vernacular. And so I went to make these shirts, and sweatshirts and stuff commemorating our trip to Kansas in our first road dog kill together with the giant that he killed. And I was putting, they're called the road dog shirts, and I was putting, road dog on it, and I was spelled it ROAD DAWG. And I don't know what made me pause and think about it. For a second, I stopped and I was like, man, I should make sure that DAWG, road dog, is not slang for something that neither of us want to be associated with. And so I looked up on Urban Dictionary what road dog is. And let's just say that we're both glad that I did. Because I don't think we both want our faces on a T-shirt that says road dog.
No.
I'm not going to mention what it is, but look it up on Urban Dictionary and you'll see why. So there we go. We'll leave that.
Jake.
Yeah, Jake bringing it. So, all right. This next one is again by not Jake Hofer, but Jake Dana Stevens. man with 3 first names.
Mm.
Doe behavior during the rut. Got anything you can share about it? You want to take this one, or you want me to go first?
Well, I think no, I'll take it. One thing that I think oftentimes people kind of overlook is does getting pestered by younger bucks. Like I think that there's a few day window before that they're actually receptive, where they're getting, and I think that we've all probably seen this happen, and maybe just haven't really thought about it, but they get pestered and pestered and pestered by these younger bucks, maybe 1 and 2 year olds that don't totally have the game figured out yet, and then in my mind, after they go through that for a few days, like they are seeking shelter because they're tired of getting bumped, they're tired of getting ran, they're tired of getting chased, they're just tired of being pestered by these younger deer. And one of the things last year when I, the day before I killed in Kansas, when I was scouting my way in, I had bumped a doe out of an area the doe was bedded in. It wasn't Phragmita, it wasn't cattails, but it was some type of similar vegetation, really, really tall, really stemmy reeds. And the stuff was so thick, and it was just a small island, right? Like maybe, I don't know, 20 feet by 30 feet or something. But the stuff was so thick, you couldn't see in it. You couldn't see out of it. You couldn't navigate through it. Like you couldn't see if you held your hand out in front of you, you couldn't see your hand. And that's not a typical place a doe would go in bed, other than trying to seek shelter. So I guess that would be one thing to keep in the back of your mind. Like if you're seeing does being pushed by younger deer and the big boy is not there playing the game and you think it's a couple of days early, think in the back of your mind, like where would a doe go to seek shelter from these younger deer? Yeah. So that would be my answer to that.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that because we saw the same thing after you killed, and we got onto that other piece, and we had that first encounter with that 160-inch deer that we ran after multiple times.
In that bottom.
Yeah, right. That doe cut out, ran into that frag that was there on the bottom, and she stayed. I never saw her come out.
Right.
The whole time we were there. And we ended up finding them somewhere else, but that doe never came out, and we could hear that I could hear that there was a deer in there. But yeah, I think I'll echo all the stuff that you just said, and then I'll make 2 kind of points, 2 maybe 3 points to add to it. Like so the one I think is pretty pretty obvious or pretty common kind of knowledge, but I'll mention it for folks out there that maybe are just that are maybe newer. When you start to see does kick their fawns out during whenever the rut is getting ready to get on, like scrapes are popping and stuff like that, and all of a sudden there's a doe and she's got like 1 or 2 fawns with her, and then like you see her and you're in a tree and all of a sudden she has no fawns with her any longer, or you're watching trail cameras, maybe you got a cell camera up and there's like this one doe with 2 fawns that keeps coming through this area for the past 3 or 4 days, and all of a sudden her does are gone. It's about to be on. Like that, she's kicked them out and said, hey, I'm about to breed, get lost. And now she's looking to she's preparing and prepared to be bred. So that's the one thing that I would mention. The other thing that I do, or that I think about, is that, and this worked for me whenever I was in Iowa. And I won't say that it'll work everywhere necessarily, because I think some of this stuff is dependent, as always, on pressure and the place that you're at, and deer density and all that good stuff. However, when I was in Iowa and I missed that one really good deer, the way I was able to find him and get back on him was like he was with a doe. Well, the first time I missed him, he wasn't with a doe. The second time I missed him, he was with a doe. And so the way I relocated him was, after I missed him the first time, I scouted and I ended up bumping a doe. And she was, I think, 3 draws away from where I had missed him. And I was like, lone doe hanging out here. Might be worth checking out. So I set up. Sure enough, like 2 days later, he comes through with said doe. And I missed him again. It's fun reliving that over and over again. But what I ended up doing was I kind of stayed in that similar spot and just kind of tweaked my setup, because she, even though she's going to get bred and he's, not necessarily bumping around, just kind of following her around, like her needs don't really change. Like the buck's needs and desires change, whenever October rolls around, in mid-October into late October and into November, of course. Like they're wanting to breed, and that's kind of what's on their mind. But by and large, like the doe, aside from getting harassed and kicking their fawns out, like she's still looking for cover and she's still looking for food. And so the game I played with that is I kind of learned and kind of understood just by the time that I was seeing her, like the time I ran into her, like where she was probably bedded. And I knew what the closest food source was, like primary food source was for her. And so I knew like at some point in the evening when she goes to feed, like that's where she's going to go. And so I just played her bed to food pattern and just played off of what her natural desires were in general, and was able to catch back up to him 2 other times. And I had a total of like 4 encounters with that buck. And so I think that's one thing you can't, will it work all the time? No, not necessarily, but in that instance for me, it was kind of worth a flyer. And it worked out because I ended up killing a buck there in the last day in that same general area. I moved like 50 yards and sealed the deal. So that's the one thing I would say. And then the last thing is, and I've mentioned this before, so I won't, go into great detail, but does pass their breeding date and their estrus date to their doe fawns. So if you find a doe family that's living in let's just say they're living in a thicket somewhere, and you recognize because you've hunted it for a year, or maybe you had a trail camera in and around there, or maybe there's a scrape there or whatever, that, man, there is a window between the 18th and the 22nd that it just goes bananas, where like I'm seeing all kinds of bucks on camera, and you feel like it's a little early for like rut, or it might even be like around, earlier than that. But like you see that there's a window where it's like the activity just kind of increases in general, right? And maybe leading up to that couple day window, you start seeing more younger, immature bucks kind of sniffing around and spending some time around there. Well, what that probably tells you is that's really, really close to that doe's breeding date. And even if she gets killed, all her doe fawns are going to carry that same breeding date. So as long as that habitat doesn't change and those does move out of there, that spot is probably always going to kind of react that same way within that same window, plus or minus a day or two on either side. And so those are a couple of things that I really use kind of strategically to hunt specific areas. Litzinger and I talked about this in the podcast, where I don't often hunt a specific deer. I hunt specific spots and date ranges related to those spots. And that's kind of how I do it, is around like the doe behavior and their estrus states, and what I've learned from those places over historical data. So that's my kind of thoughts on doe behavior. Anything else to add to that, Chad?
No, man, those are a handful of solid answers.
Yeah. So, and I don't think any one of them are like the golden or the silver bullet necessarily. It's not the magic elixir, but those are always kind of the ways I think about it. And it's all situational. You just have to think about what's going to work best for you. All right. This next one is from DK Wellman 27. What's up, DK? Best way to determine a community scrape from a secondary scrape. You want to take a swing at this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is the location of the scrape. In my opinion, the majority of stuff that is found on field edges, ag fields, things removed far enough from bedding. And you can couple this with, I guess, trail camera data by just running a camera on the said scrape for a short window. When that stuff's happening at night and it's less frequent, those are going to be your perimeter scrapes. And I think the best way to verify this stuff, obviously, is using the trail camera. But the primary scrapes that you see are typically going to be, in my experience, they're going to be closer to cover. They're going to be closer to bedding, or have some type of close relation to bedding. And they're going to be bigger in size. They're obviously going to have a licking branch. And what I see is those scrapes being used year over year over year. Not only year over year over year, but they're used 365. Mm-hmm. Like they're still being worked in the summer. They're still being hit in the spring. One example, I have a cell camera in Southern Ohio on a scrape that's still being used, and there's shed bucks using it.
Yep.
So those primary scrapes, when they're in and around pockets of other deer, whether it's bedding or security cover on a travel corridor or whatever that looks like, it's a communication tool for those animals. Not only bucks, but also does, fawns, young bucks, older bucks. I mean, they're all using that to communicate. So when you see that stuff, larger in size, it's being used 365 year over year, has a very identifiable licking branch there. Those, like, that screams primary community scrape to me.
Yeah. No, and I echo all the same things you just said. I think the one thing that's really important to kind of drive home, and you touched on it, is just the fact that those are things that are, people forget that deer don't stop communicating whenever the rut's over. They communicate all year round. It'd be like suggesting that after deer season, Chad and I don't speak to anyone any longer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have no communication with the world at all, ever. Right? They have to communicate. They're social and kind of curious animals just in general. And so, they might hit these community scrapes with less frequency. And the way Chad outlined, like, where you find them, what they look like, that's all, like, I follow the same kind of rule of thought. And really, for me, if it's not a community scrape, I don't really bother with it. Now, the one thing I will say is when I find what DK refers to as a secondary scrape, I just call them, rut scrapes. You know what I mean? Because they pop up during rut and then they dry up. And they're really only there for, like, you don't know why it's made. It could be significant communication potentially, or it could just be a young buck got frustrated and pawed the ground underneath a tree. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot harder telling what those scrapes actually mean. But what I do use them for is I mark them on my map as I'm scouting and stuff like that. And I always check all of them for tracks because I want to know, like, what deer hit it. Because if nothing else, I can at least learn maybe the maturity of the deer that was using it, or that made it, or had maybe hit it, most recently. But what I do is I always mark all those on my map because I want to see how all those relate to the community scrape that's in the area. Because because that's also going to tell me a little bit about potentially what type of route any specific deer is using, or what bucks are using in that area. Also might tell me a little bit, give me a little bit of info potentially about wind currents in that area, and based on about how they're traveling, and based on where I pick them up on cameras in general areas. And so that's what I'll kind of use secondary scrapes for. I'm not saying they don't have value. They have more intelligence building value than they do actually actionable value, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I look at the two of them, the way I kind of determine the two of them. But yeah, I mean, scrapes are being hit right now. Like you, I have a cell camera where I'm watching does and bucks still hit a licking branch. Outside of the rut and stuff, probably not going to get the ground pawing very often, but they're going to be hitting the licking branch. So,
yep.
Cool. I think we covered that one pretty well. How about you? Oh, it actually sounded like we knew what we're talking about.
Yeah, a little bit. I think we just make stuff up.
Yeah, that's pretty much. I've been making stuff up for 6 years. Don't tell anyone now. Blow my cover. Yeah. Bow Hunter Martin 7881. I like that you have the 7881. Seems like, very technical. I don't know why I said that. What do you look for when hunting sheds in the deep in the hills? You might be asking the wrong two fellas. I'll take this one first because my answer is super short. Follow someone else and hope they miss one. That's my strategy. Being honest, I'm the world's worst shed hunter. And it's almost on purpose to a degree. I don't put a lot of time into it. I enjoy going out and doing it. I've been training my dog to shed hunt. He's, doing a pretty good job in the backyard. We have yet to find one. I have a real hard time of not scouting when I'm in the woods. And I have a real hard time just dedicating time to finding sheds only. And I feel like the only way I'll find sheds consistently is if I just shed hunt and I focus on that.
Yes. Yes.
And so for me, I don't prioritize it a lot. I think in and around bedding, obviously are smart places to be. If there's a food source somewhere, the one place that I will check when I go into places is if there's ferns on the ground and there's not a lot of food sources, because they will dig those bulbs up. And when they're digging those bulbs and rooting with their nose, it'll jostle their antlers loose. And that's one of the places I will always stop by. If I see that there's been pawing in and around ferns, I'll take 5 minutes and just walk through the brush that's around that to see if there's any antlers in there, and then I'll move on. But other than that, I don't have any like foolproof plan of how to find sheds in the hills.
Yeah, I mean, I can confirm basically all the points that you said. You have to separate the two, like scouting, shed hunting, because you can't do both at one time and be efficient in either one of them. So like to your point about dedicating time toward shed hunting, like that's what the goal is that day. Like you're not scouting, you're shed hunting.
Yeah.
But your eyes are they need to be in two different places.
Yeah.
But just to kind of echo your points, the only other thing I would add to that is creek crossings. Any place where there is abrupt or sharp, fast, harsh movements, those are obviously places you want to look. I don't have a whole lot. I used to think I was a terrible shed hunter. I've in a typical year, I don't know, maybe not last year, but the years prior, maybe like 30 miles or something in late February, early March between scouting, postseason scouting and shed hunting. And I'd maybe pick up 2 antlers. So I used to think I was not very good at it. But then a couple of years ago, I took a trip to Iowa and I picked up 30 sheds in a day. So it's all
location.
Yeah. It's all relative to where you are in the deer density.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in low deer density areas, like you have to know, like you are probably going to walk 10, 15 miles and maybe find a shed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, don't get down in the dumps because you're walking out in hill country, in these vast regions and not picking up any antlers. Like that's the nature of the beast, man.
Yeah. It's, it makes me think of a post today. Our mutual buddy, Dan Johnson, he posted on an IG story today.
I saw this.
Yeah, he was like, "I just put a shed out in the field behind the house that I'll go pick up in a few hours for an Instagram post."
Yeah, I saw that.
Something like that. That was like the effect of it, and I was like, "That is awesome. I love it." Because there's some people out there doing that for sure.
Oh, for sure.
That's what makes it funny. All right. Moving on, next one. Future arrow and broadhead setups. This is from That Kid from the Woods. I like that name, man. That Kid. It should be Dat Kid. DAT Kid. That would be a lot cooler.
There you go.
Yeah,
Gangster.
Dat Kid. I don't know. For me, honestly, I'm not going to change anything. I like the setup that I've been shooting as far as like my arrow setup, and I like the broadhead setup I shot last year. Day 6 with day 6 components and afflictor broadheads is what I shot last year. My arrow weight is good. I have a short draw length, so my arrows aren't super long. Right around 500 grains, I think, for me, which is plenty good enough. So, yeah, I dig what I have right now. I don't plan to change anything at this point.
Yeah, man. Last year, I got a new bow and went through the process of getting that thing tuned, dialed in. And I went down the Ranch Fairy freaking wormhole last year. The high FOC stuff, bear shaft tuning, knock tuning. I mean, 2 months of religiously trying to get my arrows to act a certain way. Playing with FOC going anywhere from 12% up to 20%. Trying to maintain a obviously like on a lightweight arrow for me is like 500 grains because I'm shooting a 80 pound bow. I have a 30.5-inch arrow. I have 30.5-inch draw. So super long arrow, super heavy draw weight. So I'm limited on my spine setup, which is naturally going to give me a heavier arrow. But I've played anywhere from 500 grains to, into that 700 grain region. And at the end of the day, there weren't a whole lot of options that could handle an 82-pound draw, 30.5 inches with a 90% let off. Like I just could not get my arrows to react the way I wanted to. So again, the arrows I shot last year did a fantastic job, and I don't really have a bunch of complaints on the performance in the field, but knowing that I can't get them to react and recover the way that I want them to led me to doing basically a ton of freaking research over the last few months about the arrow industry, how arrows are built, what, the relation of like straightness tolerance. Mm-hmm. So here's like a little truth bomb. Everybody thinks that, I don't want to say a brand here, but there's manufacturers that will have 3 different SKUs of arrows, and one will be priced at, we'll say $200 a dozen. One will be priced at $150 a dozen, and one will be priced at $100 a dozen, based on the straightness tolerance. So one might be, 0.001 thousandths. So it's a 1/1000th straightness tolerance. And then on the cheaper end, it might be 6,000ths tolerance. That companies are making these arrows. It's the same arrow. It's the same material. It's the same manufacturing process, the same procedure. And the only difference is when the manufacturing run is done, they're batching those arrows. So they'll pull out all the arrows that have a 0.001 tolerance, a 0.003 tolerance, and a 0.005 or 6 tolerance. And then all of a sudden they have 3 different SKUs claiming that it's a different arrow, but it is the same exact arrow with different straightness tolerance. Now, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in that variation, it's like you ain't going to be able to tell unless you're like Levi Morgan.
That was my next point.
Yeah.
Like, unless you're shooting long distance from a Hooter shooter, like there's only a handful of people in the world that can tell. I mean, we're talking like the thickness of a human hair.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's only a handful of shooters in the entire world that can pull off the same shot and the same sequence without altering, the bow itself. So like, anyways, I'm getting down a rabbit hole. But my point is, I am changing a lot in my arrow setup this year. I'm probably going away from micro diameter shafts, and there's a physics standpoint behind that with dynamic spine and how the arrow recovers and the wall thickness and how much energy is absorbed. I mean, I've gone down the freaking wormhole.
You went full on nerd alert on that.
100%, dude. I just like when I get in that mode of like I don't understand something or I can't wrap my head around
why something won't work.
Yes, exactly. Like I have to know why. And typically that leads me to several other discoveries. And it's like, okay, this is a myth, or this is something that in the industry, like I think is wrong, like the straightness tolerances. There's a bunch more to it than that. I'll just leave it at that. But I am changing a bunch on my arrow setup. I'm probably going back to 246 shafts, getting away from micro diameters because they recover faster. You can play with it, dynamic spine, allow that arrow to become into equilibrium faster, which gives you more downrange efficiency. Yeah. I mean, I can go. We could do a whole damn podcast on this.
Yeah, we could, man. Jeez, like you went like. I was like, yeah, I'm not changing anything, Chad. What about you? And then like an hour later, Chad's like, right. Yes, I am changing my stuff.
Yeah. except for my broadheads. Those I've shot those broadheads. I shoot the Afflictor broadheads too. I've shot those for a few years now, and they do awesome. I'm not changing anything on that front.
Yeah, I mean the selling point for me on those was like I was shooting those out to 72 yards, and they were landing right where I was trying to put them. So at that point, I was like, well, I don't plan on shooting any further than that ever.
Right.
So, it should be good. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.